All right, looks like we're coming alive. Looks like things are coming alive. All right. Very nice. All right, I think we're up. All right, welcome. A little bit behind, but that's because my streaming software is what it is, right? So, welcome to this live stream of what I am now calling Listen Alive. I don't know if the name is going to stick, but it's just one of those things, right? It may change. Right now, it is what it is, right? My name is Keith Hayden, and I will be your host of this live stream, which is an extension or part of my book experience I call Cereus Limnic Future Flight. So as you can see behind me, my book, well, you should know by now if you've been watching me post on social media and you've looked at any of my social stuff in the last, I don't know, month and a half or so, you know that I wrote a military science fiction novel called Cereus Limnic. Well, Future Flight and this live stream, this whole business is an extension of that. It's what I'm calling a book experience. So what a book experience is basically me taking the contents of the book and repackaging it into smaller bite-sized chunks, but not just to focus on the story, but more focus on the characters, themes, scenarios, kind of a behind the book, so to speak. You know, you have behind the music and there's tons of documentaries about famous movies and things like that. But this is something very unique. As I've started to talk more and more to people about this idea of a book experience, they kind of scratch their chins a little bit and say, "Oh, Keith, that sounds like a pretty good idea." I'm not sure if they're just, being polite or something like that, or if they really think this could be something. I tend to think that this could be something. The way, there's so much technology that's revolutionizing the way we consume media with, things like DALL-E 2, where you can, if you're not aware of what that is, it's basically AI art generation, artificial intelligence art generation, to where you can put in words and it'll spit out like really badass, in some cases, photorealistic art, digital art. And it's amazing what it can do. So there's so much technology that's changing the way we think about storytelling, the way we present things. So I figured, why not the good old fashioned book? I love books like anybody else. You can see my shelf behind me. Got a ton of books, and then I've got even more on my Kindle, half of which I haven't read. I'm looking to get around to them, though. I'm looking to actually rectify that. But you know what I mean, right? I love reading. I love books. And that's part of why I wrote my own, is because I love the medium. But I had so many people after I published, as kind of a new author saying, Keith, hey, I like your book. But a lot of people just nowadays, they just won't take a chance on a new author. And I get it. There's so much stuff to experience. There's movies, there's TV shows, there's podcasts, there's YouTube channels. There's so much stuff that you could be getting into. Why would you take a chance? Why would you take a book? Why would you take a chance on something that, may not be a winner? Totally understand that. I definitely have that going on in my life. But yeah, this was my way to kind of get my stuff out there. And I'm a very extroverted person. I have had my website for years. I'm developing this online presence. So I'm like, why not kind of go full steam ahead with this idea? So that's what we're doing here. And let me go through kind of a roll call to see. I just jumped right in without even checking to make sure that I like to check and make sure everybody's there. And let me share my screen so you can see I'm doing this through Zoom. Make sure I'm sharing sound. I'm not going to make that mistake. Okay, so let's kind of go and make sure I'm live on everywhere I want to be live. Don't want to make that mistake. So looks like LinkedIn is good to go. Let me refresh YouTube. I'm using something called restream.io, which basically is a central hub for streaming stuff, and it pushes automatically to all these other different platforms. So it makes streaming pretty easy, and it's nice to be able to, I don't know, to actually just go live instead of, just going live on one platform. You can be in like 5 places at once, right? Just can be kind of confusing, but we'll make it work. Okay, Twitter's good. This is my new, by the way, this is a new Facebook page that I've created for Cereus Limnic Future Flight. So last stream I didn't have this, but I figured Facebook for me is more like a personal platform. I don't really do a lot of like my creative stuff on there, just because there's a lot of family, friends, and all that stuff, and I try and keep those separate. But I wanted to create a page, just a kind of a home base on Facebook, because I do have a lot of family and friends who, some of whom of you are maybe watching this after, after the fact during a replay, which is cool. So I wanted a place to where that wasn't my personal profile, to where you could kind of get all this information of, and I've started to post regularly on there. Like the posts that I'm posting, usually I exclude, reserved for LinkedIn and Twitter. Those tend to be my main platforms where I have my largest presence, but I've started to put those posts here as well. So you can find them here. So let me make sure this is live, because it's the first time I'm doing it live on here. That's my phone telling me that Twitch is live, and I don't see live on here. So maybe I'm live on my page. Okay, I'm live on my page, which I do not want to be live on my page. Okay, I'll have to deal with this later. At least I'm here somewhere, right? Actually, I'm gonna I'll say I'm live right now. Yes, posting this while I'm live. So I've started this like 24-hour thing to where I give people kind of 24 hours notice that I'm live. And look at this. Yes, I'm posting that I'm live while I'm live. Let's go to Twitch, make sure. So the 24-hour thing, and then I do kind of like, hey, this is the hour. In 1 hour, I'm going live, that type of thing, just to give people time, to.
And I'm so sad we didn't get to see them operate at their.
Where? Okay, I just want to see my profile. Oh, there it is. I had my face covering it. Okay, good. I'm good to go there. Cool. Okay, so I will be looking out for the chat as we go along. The way I like to do these is I do a listen of the chapter, and then I just basically listen to it with you. And then I provide commentary about kind of where my head was at, kind of what I was thinking as, I was going through it, as I was creating it. Okay, so I'm checking out my stats right now just to see what's going on. Okay, I got one person watching on Facebook. Hello. If you're watching on Facebook, say something in the chat if you feel like it, if you can. That would be nice to know you're there. And I've got one person on Twitch. So that's nice. Nobody else anywhere else. Maybe some people will come. Or maybe they'll just wait till after the fact. Okay, so back to what I was talking about. Basically, the way this is kind of that behind the book, so to speak, but it's like behind the podcast too. It's interesting the way I go about it. So this chapter, let me pull it up and let's get started. I don't have I tried not to put like, oh, it's going to be like 3:30 Pacific to 4:30 Pacific, because it may go longer than 4:30 because it's a live stream, like That's why I come from the military. My background is military. So I come from the, if it starts at 5, then it goes to 6, like it's very kind of corporate in that way. But live streams can be a little bit more open, loose, and I like that. So if you're watching and you got to go at an hour or you got to go at 30 minutes, hey, by all means, go ahead, take care of you. I'm going to be here until I'm done with what I came here to do, which is listen to this chapter. Okay, so before I get started, I went through yesterday because, last year when I posted a lot of these early chapters, I didn't have any infrastructure. I was just going, it was a crazy time. I was getting ready to move. We were getting ready to move out here to Japan. And I just kind of had my laptop and I had already recorded all of the chapters. We had already recorded before we left our place and where we were moving from. So yeah, it was just a matter of posting them. So I would post them on the road. So bottom line is I didn't have any infrastructure set up, like as far as like collecting emails and like ways to actually sell the book. I was just posting episodes. So now I have all of that stuff. And so I'm going back and updating some of these descriptions. So one thing I did yesterday, which was kind of fun, was, of course, you can actually buy my book, right? But the problem is, what had happened was when you're giving basically your product away for free, like I am through this audio drama podcast, right? Because if anybody likes it, if they're, up to the current chapter, which is chapter 25 or 24, I just put that out a couple of days ago, then, you just have to wait, eventually that I'm going to put out more chapters. And then you're like, why would I buy the book? Right. So that was essentially where I started what I was writing yesterday. Why should you buy the book when you can just listen to it for free? Let me tell you something. So basically, I was like, here's why I would buy the book. And this isn't just sales stuff or anything. This is like legit. Like I read a lot, and I listen to audiobooks. I listen to podcasts all the time. So this is my like honest God opinion, right? So one thing I like about actually reading books and having them just like either ebook or physical book is that I can actually go back and reference very easily. So that was the first thing I came up with, right? I was basically like, look, when you're listening to an audiobook on a long drive and you hear like this crazy quote, right? Meaning of life stuff, like, wow, that is amazing. What chapter was that in? What was the timestamp of that? You're busy driving, so you don't know like where in the podcast. And those of you that, listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, you probably like nodding your head, right? Because it definitely is one of those things where it's hard to capture key moments and really valuable nuggets of information when you're on the move, when you're on the go. It's just, unless you're like planning for it, you're walking, you're going to take notes during this thing. But if you're just like, hey, I got a long drive from X city to Y city, you typically, you can't take notes while you're driving, right? It's really hard. So that's one reason why I would buy the book, right? For your own personal repository. You can take notes. You can easily go back and reference, just look up the page number, flip back, boom, there you are. You can share more easily. That's another thing that's hard to do with audiobooks. Very hard to share good information from audiobooks just because, once again, you have how do you capture that? I know there's programs that you can do it and there's ways to do it, but it's harder. It's hard to do it just on the go, right? Which is typically when a lot of people consume audiobooks and podcasts. So the other reason that I would buy the physical book, if you are interested in the story, of course, is, you get more of a personal experience with it. And I know I have this thing where maybe it's just me, it's probably a bunch of people, but when I'm consuming a certain type of media, where I'm at, like the time and place, it kind of sticks with that media. So maybe that doesn't make any sense. But for example, like I was listening to an audiobook on a run like last month. It was a longer run. And I ran through this park. And I remember that I was on a certain like pivotal moment in the story where there was huge plot details being revealed, and it was just mind-blowing stuff, right? Very interesting. The book, by the way, was Three Body Problem, by Liu Cixin. Awesome book. Check it out if you can. Really cool, especially if you like hard science fiction. Really cool stuff. Anyway, so it was a massive like plot dump, and I was running through this park. So yesterday I went back to said park, and immediately that plot dump came back to me. You know, I've moved on to other books. This was about maybe a month and a half ago. And that plot dump just kind of came back to me. And it was just kind of that time and place to where that place and that book and me running at the same time kind of combined in my head to like hold the memory for me of that place. So why am I talking about this? Basically, it's stronger. It was strong at that point while I was listening to that audiobook, because I was running. I was in a place, running in a place I don't normally run in. But I feel like it's stronger when it's actually the book. I'm actually reading the book, because my imagination is more active. I'm not doing like physical activity, or I'm not driving. I'm not doing something else. I'm just reading. I'm not doing anything else. So that focused attention on having the hard copy or e-copy in front of you, I think that goes a long way. So anyway, long story short, if you like this audio drama stuff and you've listened to the podcast and you're a fan and you want to support me, support your boy, you can buy the book. Here's the links right here. So I've got my Gumroad set up so you can buy directly from me, and that helps me out a lot. And then I created this donation. I call it Future Flight Fund, where it's exactly what it is, what it sounds like. It's just a donation thing. So if you're interested in donating, you can find that in the show notes of chapter 3. I just updated that yesterday. Okay. So before we begin, let me just go around. Let me check to see what's going on. My one person on Facebook bounced, but the one person on Twitch is still there. Twitch is coming through for me. Nice. I like that. Okay, so let's get started on chapter 3. Chapter 3. Let me get a sip of water first. I don't know how these streamers be doing this, and I comment on that, like no bathroom, no water. I'm like, I should have muted myself there. That was disgusting. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's just like you remember to do certain stuff. Other times you don't. By the way, I have this very cute Lego cat that I put together. Well, it's not Lego. This is like just like bricks that my wife gave this to me. She got it from a coworker, and this was surprisingly hard to put together. You know, like it looks like, oh, it's pretty easy and stuff, but the pieces are like microscopic. Like literally, I'd have to like grip pieces like this. Look how tiny this piece is. It's like, it's so small. This is Japan. Everything's smaller over here. A lot of things are. Okay. With that said, let's get down to business. So chapter 3, Frivals. What are we talking about here? What the hell is a frival? So I was thinking as I came up with this title, because this is all about, in the last chapter, we got introduced to Jinhua and her father. This chapter focuses on Jinhua, and she's a 17-year-old girl. She's living in the city. We know it's kind of a futuristic type place, but we haven't had many details, and we're going to get some more of that in this chapter. But a big part of the relationship between these two characters is kind of their rivalry, their back and forth. And I remember I was kind of inspired by when I was a kid. I remember, you just had other kids, certain kids you would compete with, like for grades, like it was just kind of a thing back then, and it was low stakes, you just be like, oh, what'd you get on that test? Oh, well, I got an A, oh, you got an A+. Oh, okay. I got to step my game up. So it was just kind of that friendly type of competition, right? So that was kind of the spirit of this. And it got to experiment with some very fun dialogue just between two teenagers. If you haven't been around teenagers for a long time, then this will maybe take you back for, to those days when it was just you're just two kids having fun and living your life. So let's listen. And before I listen, I got to make sure that I'm paranoid. Told you. I'm paranoid that my screen share, I got to have my sound. And let me make sure my sound's not going to come blasting out of my speakers, because I don't want that. And it was going to. I'm glad I caught it. I don't want you to have to hear double of what I'm hearing. Okay. Let's go to work.
Chapter 3, Frivals.
Okay, so even the beginning part is kind of like, from a sound design perspective, it's kind of interesting, because you notice, like, in the very first or the last chapter where we introduced this track, right? And I talked about the track. If you're interested in hearing about like the story behind that track, go back and watch chapter 2 where I talk about like the story. But it's this continuation, right, of the song. And maybe you didn't notice that, but that was a deliberate choice to basically, okay, we're not going to start at the very beginning of the song. We're going to start at kind of a few seconds into the song or whatever, to kind of have this continuation, right, of this part of the story. So a lot of video games do this, they'll and they've been doing this for decades, like I remember Donkey Kong Country was one of the early games that did this. Basically, each level had it's a Donkey Kong Country. If you don't know, I just explain it real quick. It's an old Super Nintendo game. It came out the original came out in 1994, I believe, 1994. Anyway, they would have this mechanic to where they'd have the music, and if you made it halfway through the level, and you died, right? So you die somewhere in the last half of the level. You start at the half, but then the music would also start at the half. Huh? And I always thought that was kind of it's a very small tweak, right? It's a very small creative decision, but to have that continuation, to be like, okay, you're not starting completely at the beginning. You already made it halfway through, and then the song is going to meet you halfway, literally. It's going to meet you right there. I always thought that was pretty cool, so I wanted to integrate that into my creative work by giving the reader that sense of progression, right? At least, and if you hadn't noticed that before, like, at least subconsciously, right? Hopefully subconsciously it worked. Okay, let's continue.
As soon as Jinhua stepped outside of her house, a blast of heat slammed into her face, causing her to gasp. It took her body a few seconds to adjust to the drastic difference in temperature. Before she left the house, she had picked up an object that appeared to be an ocean blue-colored bar leaning in a dusty corner of the expansive entryway of the house. The pole was 2.5 long, smooth, and was her preferred method of transportation around town.
I remember early, right after the book had come out, a friend that had read it was like, 2.5 long? 2.5 what? This is my first book, so there are some typos in the book, and we didn't have a script for this. A lot of audio dramas will do scripts. They'll do, like, even if it's adapting a book, they'll do it like a kind of a adaptation of, they won't just read the book. We were literally just reading the book at this point. Remember, this started out as just a vanilla audiobook. So there was no specialized script. It was just literally my wife just reading the book. So whatever was there, that's what we read, for better or worse. So 2.5, I think I meant to say 2.5 meters. I think it was going to be 2.5 meters. And I feel like that would fit more of the description, but we'll get more description about what exactly what exactly the object is shortly. Let's go.
Perfect day for ribbon. Jinhua smiled at herself as she gripped the bar. It reminded her of how far she had come since she had purchased it for her birthday 3 years prior. In those days, all she had wanted to do was finish her homework so she could ride her ripboard with Harpreet. She spent days learning how to deploy the board's retractable wings from the bar. At first, treating the device as a delicate object, then trying to add flair to her board deployments. After about a week, she moved on to the analysis phase. She had meticulously documented the makeup of the various composite materials of the personal transport: aluminum alloy, painted fiberglass wings, and some kick-ass grip tape. After another few days, she was ready to ride. The first race against Harpreet had ended in crushing defeat. Jinhua hadn't quite worked out the optimal positioning for her levcer, the vital balancing component without which there was no levitation. No levitation meant no ribbon. A misplaced levcer meant an uncentered magnetic field, which bungled the ripboard's fickle glide profile when the wings were deployed. These were facts unknown to Jinhua the first time she stepped on the board, real-world gems of experience that her scrutinizing analysis could not account for. During that first race, her slipshod foot placement and graceless handling of the levcer had left her off balance and slow. A sharp turn at a high speed was all it took to send her flying onto the street, leaving a deep gash on her knee. It was a mistake she never made again. The bitterness of that loss fresh in her mind, she grasped the pole and hastened out the front door, locking it behind her. By the time she reached the imposing black security fence at the entrance of the driveway, she was already beginning to feel beads of sweat forming on her exposed forehead.
Okay, I'll stop there because I want to talk a little bit about this device, this ripboard is what I came up with. So this was my first like attempt in this book to like go sci-fi, right? To really like come up with something kind of interesting and unique that at least I had not seen in any sci-fi that I knew of. So that was kind of the thought process behind this. Like basically what's like a cool thing, nowadays we have, skateboards have been around forever, but we have the hoverboards, right? And that comes to mind, right? Because I recently rode one for the first time. I know it's not new, but we have this type of transport, right? So where it's a newer type of thing that kids and adults like. So I was like, what would be something that, is kind of interesting that I could come up with that kids might like in the future, that might kind of take on the legacy skateboard and kind of phase it out, but still be technological, right? So I came up with this ripboard idea, and I called it a ripboard. I can't remember why I called it ripboard, but essentially back then I was watching, if you've ever seen Avatar, The Last Airbender, right? One of the main characters, Aang, the main character of that series, he has a glider, right? And the glider is a pole, but then he kind of whips out the wings, right? And the whole premise is that he's an airbender, so he can like do this magic kind of stuff. It's a fantasy cartoon series, but through magic he can basically fly, but he can't fly like completely. Sometimes he can, like later on, but in his regular state, he cannot fly. But he can kind of glide. He can control the air enough to where he can glide. So he has this glider that allows him to fly, like assisted flight. So I thought of that and I was like, man, that's kind of cool. Like I always love that kind of concept. So I was like, what if it was like a glider except on the ground? And instead of like a skateboard, it's got like, instead of wheels, it's got wings. And so that was kind of the premise for the ripboard. And then I came up with, I was thinking of, I remember a long time ago, actually when I was here, I used to be stationed here in Japan when I was in the military. Remember somebody bought me like a globe that floated, right? It had like one of those magnetic platforms. And I remember this fascinated me back then. This was a long time ago, but yeah, you had essentially had a magnet and you put together a puzzle. And then through the magnet and the base, they kind of worked together. And then the opposing charges, they weren't very powerful, but it was enough to make it float above. And I always thought this was pretty cool. So that's what I was thinking when I came up with the idea of the levcer. Basically a powerful device that you needed to make this thing float. The thing would be made of some type of composite materials that would react with the levcer and it would allow the thing to float. So the levcer is kind of, I imagine it is like kind of a disc like thing. If you've ever played Super Smash Brothers, right? I'm a big fan of the game. My wife and I played Ultimate for like regularly for years, just like just between us, right? We try and go online and we just get destroyed. So we quickly stopped doing that because we would get demoralized, be like, oh, this game sucks. We don't want to play this anymore because we get our ass kicked online. But essentially, I think of like the reflect shields. If you play like any of the Star Fox characters, you play Wolf, you play Falco or Fox, they have these reflector, all three of them, to where you can reflect like projectiles and things. So I thought of something like that. Like that's what comes to mind when I think of this levcer, to where you could hold it kind of in the palm of your hand, but then you activate it and then boom, the magnetic field comes out. So anyway, all that is the behind the ripboard, I guess. I mean, it's, and when I think of this, like I want to be more like technical in the future, because I definitely, that's where I put this book into like more sci-fi fantasy. And it's definitely not hard sci-fi because I don't go into the like the physics behind the magnetic field and how is it floating and all that stuff. That's the kind of hard sci-fi stuff that as I'm reading and listening to Three Body Problem, and now I'm listening to The Dark Forest, the second book in the series, he does an excellent job of going like in depth. But I think his background is in like physics or something. He's like a professor, and I don't have that type of background. But long story short, I would like to include more of that, more detail about technical things in future books, because I think it's super interesting, and there's a teaching aspect to it as well, to where it's applied in a cool way, but you're still learning about real world concepts. I dig it. Let's continue.
Wiping the perspiration away with the back of her hand, she continued to move as if she had no place to go. She pulled out her identification card from her pocket and held it toward the gate scanner. The card was tomato red in color and housed her picture, social security number, driver's license number, links to her major bank accounts, medical records, as well as money. All of the information had somehow been smashed within its microscopic computer components. I can't believe my entire life is on this card. She always had the same thought whenever she used the thin slice of technology. The all-in-one card was convenient, yet it made her feel vulnerable to have the entirety of her person housed within one easily pilfered or misplaced item.
So this was another kind of technology that is, I feel like we're not already there to where obviously we have the extent your medical records and everything on one card. It's not going that hard yet, but I feel like in the future, this is definitely like one of those things that it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Like to me, like, why wouldn't you have access to like your most valuable information like right there so easily? I mean, right now, everything is scattered among like various systems, right? If you want your banking information, you got to pull up your bank's app or their website, or God forbid, you got to call them. If you want your medical information, you got to call your medical provider or whatever. And it's super, just, it kind of sucks, to do that, like all of these. I just think of when we moved last year. Oh God, if you've moved recently, like what a pain in the ass having all of your life basically in these different silos, right? Oh, I got to call Verizon for my cell phone. I got to call, the internet service provider. Everything's disparate. And one by one, you have to shut things down. And then wherever you move to, you got to set it back up again with brand new providers and brand new processes. It sucks. So I feel like that's one of those things in the future to where I don't think it's going to be this way. Like, if anybody has any sense at all, like, if we're smart, we're going to find a way to like bring most of these things together to where the people who it belongs to, which is you, it's your records, it's your life, it's your stuff, you can just access it very easily. And it will be very common to accept these forms of payment. So this is one of those, that's where this story dips into like speculative fiction, but it's more of like, I don't know what to call it, hopeful fiction, right? This is Keith Hayden's view of, this is where I go back to the original plan of Cereus Limnic was to write a manifesto, right? A manifesto of like, hey, this is what's fucked up with the world. This is where I feel like things should be going. This is just my best guess, but hey, I'm just a random guy. What do I know? But yeah, this is one of those things that, man, I really wish this would happen. It would just make a lot of sense, and it would make a lot of people's lives a lot easier. Let's keep going.
The security panel made a series of beeps, signaling that her card had been accepted. The old black gate emitted the sound of aged metal on slightly oxidized tracks as it slid open. Jinhua sidled through the opening to hasten her trip. The heat of the morning was already beginning to make its ever-warm presence known to her face and skin. Upon reaching the street, her device chimed in her tiny shorts pocket. With practiced skill, Jinhua pulled it out and examined the screen. The message from Harpreet was brief, yet provoked an excited smile onto her face. Barter race? Meet at the Old Veterans Park at 10? Jinhua dictated a voice message reply. I'll be there in 5. A small sticker of a checkered flag accompanied her words on the display screen.
So voice messaging is another one of those technologies that, obviously it's already around. We already have it, but it's not like super widespread yet. And I feel like it's not right now. The preferred way of like interacting with technology is through this, right? Smartphone. You typically text and do that, but I feel like very soon in the future, voice, there's a lot of people working on voice. I know Amazon's working on it. I know Facebook's working on it. Google, of course, to make it to where that is the primary way to like interact with technology. The same way, the keyboard, the good old fashioned keyboard is like the primary way. It's like, why have need of this hardware when you can just pull up your voice, or obviously you don't need to pull up your voice, but when you can just use your voice and interact with the thing. I mean, we already have microphones and sensors that are pretty much ubiquitous. Every camera has a microphone in it, like a lot of them do. So it's kind of a no-brainer to say, hey, just use your voice to turn things on, to turn it off. Don't use, it eliminates the need for physical interface with whatever technology it is. I remember, I think of back in the day, remember the clap on, right? You'd clap. And this was a big thing like back in the 90s, right? I remember so many shows like lampooned it, like made fun of it. But it was one of those things, right? To where, look, I don't have to get up and turn off my lights. All I have to do is, and the shit turns off, like that was one of those. And it's kind of silly now. When you think of it now, like decades later, like, oh, that was dumb, like you look like an idiot. And, bottom line is, it eliminated, it was one of those examples of a technological way to eliminate the need for interacting with a physical interface. And I'm saying it that way, but that's what it is basically, like you don't need the light switch anymore. You don't need to get up. You just clap your hands and it goes off or it turns on, whichever one, right? I never saw people turn on the lights with the clapping. It was always turning it off. Like it was always like a bedtime scenario. It was like some elderly person, and then they'd lay down, and I don't know, but that's what I was thinking behind this, right? To where it's like, here's a younger person, everything's voice now. Get used to it. Let's continue.
Within a second, the device was back in her pocket. In a fluid motion, she used an underhanded swing to fling the blue pole in front of her, while simultaneously activating the wing deployment. Sky blue wings extended from the pole, ready to accept her feet. Before it hit the concrete with a dissonant clang, a noise she had named the sound of shame, Jinhua expertly positioned and activated her levcer at the precise moment, then leapt toward the hovering board with style.
I love that image, right? And this is the power of fiction. I love this. And this was something that I remember as I was writing this scene, I struggled with, right? And maybe if you're a new author, it's not very intuitive. It's like, how do you write? Basically, when I think of writing, I think of the words as like the eye of a camera. It's like, where do I want the reader's mind to focus? And this, obviously this is in the audiobook version, but this was originally just written, right? So in a scene like this, where you're describing this action of, especially it's not a common action. It's not like getting out of a car or getting out of bed, to where, okay, it's something that people can easily conceptualize and think about. It's kind of different. Where do you start? And I don't know. I just kind of went with what's the main focus of the action here. And I love how it all comes together in like this very anime style moment. There's a lot of anime influence in this chapter and we'll get more into it as we get deeper into the chapter, but this idea of her, just throwing the pole out, the wings come out, and then at the same time, before it hits the ground, somehow fantasy, right? Somehow she activates the levcer, the thing starts floating, and then she steps on it without hearing the sound of shame, right? And that sound of shame detail is interesting too, because I see it as a teacher. Kids always come up with like just different mechanics and things, and they come up with just different kind of games. It's all games. I remember that's what I loved about being younger. Like we had games. My brothers and I had games for everything. Everything was a game. Daniel and the Lion's Den, right? Don't touch the floor. Floor is lava. That's like very common. It was the same thing. We called it Daniel and the Lion's Den, right? It's where it's like, if you touch the floor, then you fall into the lion's pit or something. That was kind of the game. But it's very imaginative, and it's fun to make up these games. It's fun to play the games, and it's kind of these little games that you can play with your friends too. And I see it often, when I'm teaching, that kids are doing this with different, not just video games, apps and stuff, but just like little silly stuff, that they just kind of make, you're in your own world as a kid. And I love that. So I wanted to bring that spirit to this chapter. That's why I came up with that sound of shame, to where this is something that, a kid would do, would basically say, hey, if your pole hits the ground before you deploy the wings and you make a nasty sound, then you're trash at this and you lose the game, essentially. That was a pretty cool mechanic. All right, let's continue.
The sun gleamed, and the ripboard took flight, just as her feet landed on the safety of reinforced grip pads.
There it is. Love
She
it.
was suspended only by the harmonious equilibrium between the balancing forces of the levcer, her stance, and the board. I won't lose this time. With a determined look on her face, she kicked at the ground, propelling the board forward. 5 minutes later, Jinhua arrived at the park to find Harpreet waiting under the shade of a large tree. In her jean shorts and burgundy tank top, she stood tall, with her arms at her side, hands open, eyes closed, as if she were an offering to the sun. Just as they had competed in all things related to school, so too did the two young women often compare their physical characteristics, as if they were professional athletes preparing for a championship.
Okay, so brief note on the sound there. It's funny because when we were in California, we lived in a relatively quiet neighborhood. It was like at the end of a street, and it was like in its own little cul-de-sac. But that meant that when sound did come, it was super noisy. So I had a Yeti microphone, and it was a great microphone. My brother gave it to me. And it was a starter microphone, it's not the best, but it was something. I was happy to have anything to start. So this microphone just picked up all types of just echoes and reverberations. And trust me, y'all, I tried and put a little pillow behind our recording, made like a little makeshift recording area and things like that, but it didn't really work out. So in this part, this is still chapter 3, very early. So I was still like experimenting with the DAW, the digital audio workstation I was working with. At this time, I think I was still using what's that free one on Mac? GarageBand. I was still using GarageBand. So I didn't know anything about like compression or EQ or mastering. I knew gating because, gating, obviously, I got rid of, like, you don't hear the complete truck passing by, but you can still hear those ambient sounds. So it kind of worked out though, because in a lot of the scenes where, as I've been going through the chapters, in a lot of the scenes where, like they were supposed to be in a house or an apartment or something, or in a neighborhood, right? You'll hear these sounds. So I was like, well, it kind of works out, because you would probably hear those types of sounds if you were like in a neighborhood, right? A large truck passing by or whatever, but it's totally unplanned. So let's keep going.
As Jinhua approached the unaware Harpreet, she mentally compiled a list of random attributes, assigning herself or her best frival, friend rival, her own created word.
So there's the frival thing. I don't know if I actually said what it meant, but yeah, friend rival. That was kind of where Frivals comes from, and hence the name of the chapter.
As the victor. Height, her, only by 2 inches. Weight, definitely her, by several pounds. Chest size, Harpreet. Hair length, draw. Intelligence, don't make me laugh. Me. Smile, I guess her. Ripboard skill, me by a mile.
So this was another just fun thing that it was like, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote this book the way I did, because it challenged me as an author, right? Because obviously it's been a long time since I've been a 17-year-old kid. I've never been a 17-year-old Asian girl. So that is an experience that is foreign to me. But I think, and I talk about this in well, let me talk about 2 things when it comes to this, because I think it's important that I mention what I think about this. But So the first aspect is the character aspect, right? That's why I put these descriptions in, because they challenged me to like get in the shoes of other people. And at that point, you know, I was heavy in the classroom. I was doing my teaching certification. I was doing like, I think I was in my internship at the time for teaching. So I had been in and out of middle schools and high schools in the area where I lived. And I was hearing kids talk all the time. I was tutoring, you know, like high school kids. And I remember was like the emphasis of the scene, right? Or that was the inspiration. That was the inspiration for the scene. It was basically a lot of kids and a collection of conversations, but in character of this character. So it works on two ways. One, you get the 17-year-old kid kind of mentality, but then it's also character building for Jinhua. You know, you get to see she's kind of a little competitive. She's kind of doing this comparison thing. And, you know, obviously she has like certain things where she's like, totally me. I'm definitely smarter than her. But she's got me on, you know, height and chest size, you know, like this is the kind of things that, you know, people do in general. You're always comparing yourself. You know, I don't care who you are. You can lie and say you don't, but I know I do. You know, like it's just kind of a human thing. You're right. I meet another guy and I'm like, oh man, this dude's like way taller than me. You know, I'm not that tall, but I'm like, I'm not short either. I'm 5'10", but I meet guys that are like 6 foot plus and stuff. And that's one of the first things you just notice, right? It's just, you know, and it doesn't say anything about character or anything, because obviously you can't control anything about your height, but it's just one of those things to compare. So I put that in here. But the second thing I wanted to talk about with this part is this issue of like, you can't write about people unless you are that person. And there's been a movement of this, and I've seen this kind of on just in online. I remember talking about this in a podcast episode that I made a couple of years back. But essentially, it's like it goes like this: you know, you can't write from a certain perspective unless you are that perspective, like you've lived that perspective, or you have like you have some type of like provable connection to that perspective, right? So, for instance, right, for me, writing in the mindset of a 17-year-old Asian girl, I am not supposed to be able to do that, right? According to this mentality, because obviously I'm not a girl, I'm not Asian, I'm Black. And so it's off limits to me, you know, and I think this is, I could go on and on about this. I could go on and rant about this, but essentially I think this is flawed thinking. I think this, it leads to less empathy. It leads to less exploration or an appreciation of other people's lived experience. I don't know. And I think just as a creator, as a writer, it really limits you. And I know there are people that write like this, you know, like, and I read some commentary just a few days ago, I think it was last week or something, about how good literature and good writing is kind of, it's harder to find nowadays because people are writing from this perspective. It's like, oh, I'm white, so I can't put a Black person in my story, or I can't write from the perspective of a Black person because I'm white, you know? And I think that's, I feel sad for people who think that way, because you're missing out on an opportunity to get to know another person's lived experience, you know? And I get it. And I'm not saying, there's definitely ways to do this wrong, right? And I'm not saying I did it like flawlessly or anything. I don't know. You be the judge. But there's definitely ways to do it wrong. There's definitely ways to over stereotype. And a lot of people do this, right? They go with the tropes. We see this a lot in, you know, movies and stuff. And you see it in all type of media, to where, okay, just throw a Black face in there, just throw an Asian or a homosexual face in there just to say we did, right? And that, I don't like that either, because it reduces people to like, okay, you're just basically a stand-in caricature just to, you know, we're not going to develop your character. We're not going to do anything with you. We're just going to make it clear that, hey, we put a Black person in here, we should get points for that, you know, and things like that. And I think this is a losing game. I don't like where just creation and stories in general, like popular stories I've seen have been doing this a lot lately. I've seen it from big budget movies to like books and things like that, to where this has kind of been a creeping influence on people's creative, uh, on their creative tendencies, or in their creative spirit, to where it's like, oh, I can't, I'm afraid of getting canceled or whatever, and getting put through the ringer by this certain group of people because I didn't like represent them in like 100% fidelity as somebody would if they were actually of that race or ethnicity or mindset or whatever. And I think that's a shame. I could go on and on about this. I could talk about this a lot. I have a lot of thoughts around this, and I just think it's so wrong. I think it's ridiculous. Like, I think a lot of this stuff has gone way too far as like how we think about, we have words for everything. Everything can be bad in a certain context, right? Cultural appropriation, just things like that, to where it's just everything's like assumed to be negative and cynical, so like you can't be curious, you can't appreciate other people. It's hard to like get to know other people because you can get accused of being like the words are escaping me at the moment, but you know what I mean. You could probably think of like, just look at any comment section on like a major news publication or something online, or YouTube comments, or God forbid Reddit comments. Just look and you will see these things, and it's dangerous, man. It's not good. So anyway, let me go. Let's bring it back to Cereus and Limnic, right? The story. We've got these two girls. They're in the park. They're meeting up. They're friends, and they're about to compete. Let's see what they do.
The mental exercise made Jinhua grin to herself as she floated toward her friend, whose cinnamon-toned skin glistened with a film of sweat in the morning heat. When she was close enough, Jinhua jumped off to the side of the ripboard at the optimal position, retracting the sky-blue wings and kicking the pole back into her right hand in a smooth fashion.
This was another one of those anime moments, where she gets off. As soon as she gets off, she's so skilled at it, she just kicks it, and with this flair. And this, not just anime, they do this in Chinese dramas as well, to where it's not enough to have like a powerful attack. You got to have like the stance to go with it, and you got to have the look, right? And if you're a fan of Chinese dramas, like, you know what I'm talking about. Like in these ones, like my wife and I watch the ones all the time where they have the powers and stuff. And yeah, it's cool to watch, right? Because it's just very like, it's just, everybody just looks cool fighting. It's less about like the actual like damage and stuff. I feel like in Western media, and maybe I'll just speak for American media, it's more about the damage. Like fights are about like, where did they get hit? How much are they bleeding? How bad are they hit? In Chinese dramas, it's more like, it's less on like the damage that you're causing and more about like how you're doing it. It's the style, it's the flair, like they have this thing, and my wife and I always joke, to where they spit up blood, right? Like it's a thing to where once you take enough damage, like that's the sign that you've taken a lot of damage in a Chinese drama, is internal bleeding, right? So it's just a funny thing to me. It's funny. I like that. So here is just one of those moments to where it's kind of inspired by those two medias. Oh man, I didn't even realize I'm already at an hour. Oh well. There's a live stream, so we're gonna keep going. Let's do it.
It had taken her months to master the movement, and she was proud of it. Practicing your mountain pose? Jinhua said in a soft voice. Harpreet's eyes fluttered open. A big grin formed on her lips. Gotta do something in this heat. It's so hot. And it's only 9:30. Yeah, it is. I think it's supposed to get up to 116 degrees today. Hot enough to cook a whole meal on the sidewalk, Harpreet said. Both girls laughed. Harpreet put her hands on her waist, sticking her chest out. You ready to lose?
Okay, so I want to talk briefly about that last part, about the heat, because that was a detail that was also deliberate. Basically, like, hey, where are we going to be at on this like global warming thing in by the time this story takes place, right? In this fictional world, 2062. And I don't know. Whatever I'm not gonna go into like the details, the particulars of like global warming and stuff. You believe what you believe, but the facts are the facts, right? And I remember just recently, my wife and I took a trip down to Antarctica, and we just got some amazing briefs and like just stone cold facts about like, hey, shit's warming up, and it doesn't look like we're doing anything, anybody's really doing anything meaningful to stop it. So it's just one of those things. And that's, I think that's where my personal, uh, where I'm at with global warming. When I hear people talk about it, it's like, okay, cool. What can we really do about it? You know? And I remember asking one of the presenters, down there, like, hey, what can we really do? And it was all stuff you've, heard before, shop local, recycle, take less, drive less if you can, like it was practical tips like that. But the problem is a lot of fucking people have to do it for it to be effective, and just not enough people do it regularly enough. So the result is shit's heating up and ain't shit you can do about it. So that's where I was at with this story. Basically, like, hey, things are more or less in this world, things have more or less progressed as if, there's no game changing technology that has drastically changed global warming for the better. It's still happening. And this story doesn't really focus on like the effects of global warming. It's definitely not like one of those types of stories, but it's basically saying, hey, in the future, this is kind of how it played out. Like nothing really changed. Everybody, for the most part, it was status quo around most of the world. Developing countries kept developing. Developed countries maintained some sort of status quo. There hasn't been really any breakthrough in behavioral change or anything like that, or societal change in that regard, right? So the result is you just deal with 116 degrees. And I think about that when I was a kid, because I grew up in Texas, and my wife, she does not like being hot. So that's one of the things she always says about my hometown, San Antonio. It's like, it's so hot there. It's so hot. And I remember being a kid, the heat just, it wasn't a factor. Like you just knew it was going to be hot. Like we didn't know like, okay, it's 100 degrees today or whatever. You just knew it was going to be hot. And I'm sure if you are one of those people who grew up in like a hot place, it was probably the same for you. It's just like, hey, it's going to be hot, especially, summertime, things like that, early fall. It's just going to be hot. What are you going to do about it? Not going to school, not go outside. There's really nothing you can do. So that was kind of mentality I had here with these characters. It's like, okay, it's 116 degrees outside. Who the fuck cares? Like, they still got to go to school. They still got to live their lives. And so does everybody else. So that was kind of the mentality I had. Like, yeah, it's global warming. It's hot. It's really hot. Sure. Like compared to today. So what? Wear more sunscreen, drink more water. I'm not trying to trivialize the issue, but that was the mentality that I had when I wrote this book. And that's the mentality that the characters have, as well. Let's continue.
Her tone was challenging, defiant. She reached for an orange pole leaning against the tree, then twirled it in her hands, thrusting it down near her feet in dramatic fashion, waiting for Jinhua's usual reaction. A reaction that never came. Something's on her mind. I wonder what. Hey, you all right? I had the dream again. Which one? The one about Derek? No! Jinhua slapped her arm with enough force to sting, but not to bruise. And ew. Okay. Just had to be sure. Harpreet said, laughing. You mean the one about the broken computer, right? What could it mean? Harpreet stood silent for a moment. Striking a pensive pose with arms crossed, chin on fist, she looked at Jinhua, wanting badly to find answers or explanations where both knew there were none. She looks so vulnerable sometimes. After a minute of the ambient noises of nature, people walking
And trucks passing by.
in low conversation, and the occasional vehicle passing by,
Oh, there it is.
Harpreet spoke. Do you know what would help you right now? What? A little bit of ribbon. You always feel better after that. Harpreet placed a warm, slightly sweaty hand on her shoulder. Jinhua smiled. The unexpected contact was helpful. The details of dream fragments still lingered in her mind, but she was ready to let them go, to allow them to drift away in the wind behind her board. You're on.
Okay, so I'll say a brief thing about the production there. Actually, listening to this again, I haven't heard this in probably since last year. That's probably the last time I listened to this, and I was afraid that, because I remember I did the reverb thing for the thoughts, and I was trying that out, and like I said, I was doing a lot of experimentation at this point with my sound design, and that was one of the things. I was like, okay, I'll do the thoughts. It's kind of like, super reverby, and people can tell that the thoughts, and then of course it's panned right between these two girls. They're having this conversation, so at least for me, Harpreet's on the left, Jinhua's on the right, if you're listening to this in headphones, and I think that works. Actually, I like that. But yeah, the panning thing and the reverb, it's not something that I kept up. It was one of those ideas that, one, it just takes a long time to do it, especially when you have a lot of like thinking and stuff. And then rereading this chapter, I reread it yesterday. I don't like how I did they call it head hopping, like this chapter clearly focuses on Jinhua, but yet, all of a sudden, okay, now it's Harpreet's thoughts that we're hearing, and it's just a little jarring. So it's not something that in the future, I think in future chapters, I don't do it as much. If I do, then shame on me. But I wouldn't do it again now. Like if I was writing this over again now with more experience, I wouldn't do it again. I don't really like that. So anyway, for me personally, for some people, maybe for you as a writer, it works. For me, no, it don't work. Okay, let's continue. Oh, and the truck passing by, and I mean, that was just a coincidental line, right? That I was talking about earlier in the live stream, to where, hey, I just got lucky with some of these sounds, right? A huge truck passed by, and it's like, oh, and they only the ambient sounds of nature and vehicles and birds and vehicles passing by and all this stuff. Like, just got lucky. Sometimes you get lucky. Let's continue.
That's my girl, Harpreet said, jumping with excitement. With flair, she waved her orange pole around her head and tossed it at the ground, while in the same instant activating her levcer with the opposite hand. Jinhua flinched when she heard the sound of metal clashing against the sidewalk. Harpreet fell backwards onto her backside, letting out a string of exaggerating expletives in English and Punjabi. God damn it. One day I swear I'm gonna get that thing that you do down. Jinhua giggled. One day. Good thing you fell on your oversized safety cushion. Harpreet stood up as a group of crows vacated a nearby tree at the sound of her laughter. No kidding. If it were you, you would have probably shattered a hip. Hey, mine's just taking longer to inflate. Both girls laughed.
I love that back and forth. And this was a very light version. Like the conversations I hear between some kids, maybe but maybe you don't want to know. I mean, it'd just be so weird and nasty. Just sometimes just straight up weird. Like what do y'all? I remember I did, like last school year, a couple months ago, this kid was just like straight up talking about like how he had sex with this one girl. And I was like, I listen to a lot of conversations, and most of the time I just let it roll because I'm like, one, it's just interesting. Second of all, it's like, I have the philosophy of it's better that I hear what they're talking about instead of like them just shutting up and then just doing what they do, right? At least you have something to go on when you hear them talking. That's just kind of my personal philosophy. But at this instance, he's just like going through the details and all this stuff. I said, bro, I stood up from my desk. I said, bro, like that's real messy, man. Nobody, don't be putting your business out there, like, and it's not just like because of him. It's like, and I'm assuming the girl wasn't there, but it was just still like kind of just one of those things, like, man, like, and the way he was talking about it too, it was just really just kind of just, it's just very crass, and I don't consider myself like a prudish person. I'm like very squeamish about like talking about sex or anything like that, but it was just the way he was talking about it that just was like, bro, you're doing it wrong. Like, kid, you need to shut up. Like, you just, no, don't do it that way. Anyway, point is, this conversation between Jinhua and Harpreet was very much inspired by those interactions that I witnessed and overheard like back then, when I was writing this. And you tell me if you thought it was convincing or not, but I look back and kind of laugh and like, yeah, it's definitely fun. It was definitely fun to write this chapter and do it that way. All right, let's finish up.
Extending the moment of levity. Harpreet redeployed her ripboard, activating it with more caution this time. As she stepped her right foot onto the wings, a look of surprise made her eyebrows arch and her eyes grow wide. Her hand dug her device out of her shorts to check the notification. Shit. What is it? Jinhua asked with concern. Committee time got moved up. Apparently, old master scholar M.S. Rhodes is bringing a new student from SAC and wants us all there early. How long do we have? Harpreet brought the device closer to her face, as if she were an old woman with a vision impairment. 5 minutes. Lines of determination drew themselves onto Jinhua's face. Then we'd better rip it. Her frival mirrored her expression, returning a challenge-accepting smirk. She lowered her center of gravity, ready to begin the contest. Ready? Harpreet nodded, hovering her right leg at a 45-degree angle above the widened sidewalk for a stronger first kick. Go!
I'll let it play a little bit. Oh, okay. So that's continuing that progression, right, of the song. And then that goes back to, and I think in the next chapter, we're going to see the song kind of continue. So, yeah, that was chapter 3, Frivals. I hope you enjoyed this listen alive that I'm calling it. Like I said, I don't know if the name's going to stick, but I like it so far. That was fun. And I just have one last note about that last part. You heard the truck pass by. I remember I tried to gate it. Like I tried to like get it out of there. And I'd been trying for like, I don't know, 30 minutes or something. I was like, look, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to leave it in, and it works, right? Like actually it forgetting that detail and then forgetting that, hey, that truck sound was going to pass by. Like it fits, right? These two girls are in a park, they're on a street, and it works. It just so happens that that wasn't meant to be in there. It was just a truck passing by randomly as I was recording that I couldn't get out because my sound design skills sucked at the time. So what are you gonna do? That's this chapter. That's Frivals. I hope you enjoyed this live stream. I've already started. I'm trying to put these out. I'm not sticking to like a weekly thing because I feel like I've done that before and it's super restricting. You know, some weeks I don't have it in me. Other weeks, I'm really trying to get out new chapters of this audio drama because, yeah, it was one of my goals this year to finish the audio drama. And yeah, it takes a long time to edit. And the next chapter I'm working on, which is chapter 25, I just started last night, and it's like a 41-minute chapter. It's probably like it's a long chapter, and because it's the end of basically Lily's arc, the last 3 chapters have been Lily's story, and it's kind of a flashback backstory for her and for other things as well. So this is like the final chapter in that mini series. So it's just a longer chapter, and it's so much work. So bottom line is it's probably not going to be weekly that I do these, but it's going to be at a regular interval. I like doing this, and as more people hear about it, as you know, I do more, I imagine more people will hear about it. If you like this, then I'm going to be breaking it down like I did last time, which was so helpful, into little chapters on this YouTube video, and it'll make it more shareable and make it easier for people to find. Just skip to different parts that they're more interested in, because I get it, you know, watching an entire, it's almost hour and a half long live stream, like, man, it's super hard to do, y'all, and I get it. So try and make it easier for you to keep up with it, and in that sense, hopefully you and other people, more people, can access it. But please share it with people if you like what I'm doing. This is a very unique kind of thing to do this for an entire book. I know most people would just, a lot of authors would have just moved on and started writing another book. I'm not most people, and I'm doing this. I'm fully committed. I'm in it. And yeah, I'm going until I finish. So it's kind of, this is just as much for me as it is for you, you know, to stay on with the journey. So before I go, last plug for, hey, if you want to support me, the best way to support me is by buying the book. You know why? You get more use out of your imagination in your head, and it's easier just to share like parts of the book that you like. It's easier to go back and reference and like actually think about good lines from the book, especially a long novel like this. You know, there's a lot of nuggets and things like that. And it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting that you may want to think about or share with other people. So it helps to have your own copy of the book. Right now, I'm doing digital only because, frankly, doing physical was a pain in the ass when I was in the States. And now I'm over here in Japan, which means if I wanted to get more physical copies, I think I have like 3 physical copies somewhere here in this room. But if I wanted to get more, I'd have to ship them over here and then ship it to you wherever you're at. And both are not cheap. So there's basically 2 double shipping costs I got to pay to ship it. I could ship it directly to you, but it's just a pain, y'all. Like dealing with physical books, and more people want the ebooks anyway at this point, especially, you know, I'm not like one of these famous writer names to where people want the physical copies, but that could change. And if it does, I would be very grateful, and I would happily get you a physical book. So if you are interested in like having a physical copy of my book, Cereus Limnic, here's physical copy. If you're interested in having this physical copy or something like this, then hit me up on social or leave a comment and I'll contact you and we can talk about it. But default is the ebook, which you see here, and you can see it here. This is a great way to support me. And then the Future Flight Fund, you know, this is the fund for the book experience that I've been talking about, and it really just helps. Any bit of extra support always helps, y'all, because this is all out of my pocket. As I said, there's no black card or red card for this. It's just Keith Hayden's credit card, and that's it. So thank you so much for your attention. This has been fun. It went a little bit longer, but I don't care. I'm glad it went longer, because as long as I'm talking about something and it's interesting, it doesn't matter how long it goes. But look forward to the next one. You can subscribe to wherever you're watching this on. If you're watching it on Twitch, if you're watching it on YouTube or wherever, Facebook, make sure you hit, if you're on Facebook, make sure you hit like for the Future Flight page, because I'm going to be posting regular updates on there. If you're on Twitter, then you can follow me on Twitter. I'm also on TikTok. TikTok isn't all about Cereus Limnic though. TikTok is kind of my book channel, to where I just talk about books that I'm reading. So I'll typically do like a video after I finish a chapter. That's at least my goal. I don't do it all the time, depending on like time and circumstances. But TikToks are quick kills, and yeah, I do a lot of experimentation with like different filters and stuff. Yesterday I did this one where I'm like running really fast, and it looks like I'm running really fast, but then I'm just talking regularly. I don't know. It's super silly, y'all. It's kind of fun, but whatever. So you can follow me on there. LinkedIn as well. You can follow me on LinkedIn. And I think some people have found me on LinkedIn as I've been doing this. I haven't been on there and checked, but yeah, I look forward to reading your comments and to hearing from you in the future. So thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next one.